So if you'll take your Bibles with me and turn to the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 11 is where we were last week. We're on 12 and 13 this week. We're going to start talking tonight about that last half of the 7 years that we call the tribulation. Isn't really a biblical word for it. It's just the last half of the 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel. And this begins with what is called the abomination of desolation. That's what it's called in the book of Daniel. We're going to read what Revelation says about it here in chapter 12 and 13. But before we do that, take a minute and look with me at this little summary chart that we've got here. You'll see that the book of Revelation, chapter 1 was an introduction, and chapter 2 and 3 are the addresses to the churches. That was, remember, Jesus told John, I'm going to show you things that are and things that shall be hereafter. And chapters 1, 2, and 3 are things that obviously are right then when John was writing. John's present. In chapter 4, we start John's future. It's still our future. And Jesus says, come up hither and I'll show you things that will be hereafter. So that's when you start the future part of the book of Revelation. Chapter 4 and 5 is John in heaven. Chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9 are giving us the seal judgments and the trumpet judgments, and you'll see also there's 144,000 that are sealed, but those are pretty successive, one after the other, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seal judgments, and then the seventh seal judgment is really just the whole thing is just the trumpet judgment. It starts off the trumpet judgments. So those are obviously one after the other because they're numbered, right? And so on and so forth. Chapters 8 and 9 give you those seal judgments. And then you get to chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, and you kind of have a break from this progressive thing, this linear progression, because it was things that were back in John's time, the first couple chapters. Then chapter 4, things that are in the future. Chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9 are, the first, period of succession during that 7 years. And then it all pauses, and it's not like one after the other type of a thing. Chapter 10, you have a vision of time ending. And so that's why I call it a timeless vision. It's really saying now it's starting to announce the end because now we're at the halfway point, right? So it's saying this is like the beginning of the end, right? You have also chapter 11, the two witnesses. It says that they minister for 3.5 years. And you can see here I put a little arrow that kind of goes back to the previous 3.5 years, right? They're about to be killed, rise from the dead, and then ascend into heaven, which means they're not. This is not the return of Christ. This is when they're actually going to ascend into heaven, which would be the halfway point. So they've been ministering for 3.5 years. And then the seventh trumpet is sounded there in chapter 11, which sort of announces the last half of the tribulation, the beginning of the end. And then in chapters 12 and 13, we're going to see again the timing. 3 times in chapters 11 and 12, you'll see the time, either in months or days or years of 3.5 years. And actually, it's again in chapter 13. So 4 times in those 3 chapters, 11, 12, and 13, that 3.5 year number keeps coming up. So in chapter 11, it was 1,203 score days, 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, that the witnesses were ministering. And as we've already talked, that's the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Now in chapter 12 and 13, we're going to see it again and again. Chapter 14, again, is more parenthetical. It's like visions of things that are happening that are talked about throughout the book. And then chapter 15 and on through 19 gets us right back into that linear succession, 1, 2, 3 vial judgments and things that are happening. And so that kind of gives you an understanding. As you're reading through the book of Revelation, you're going through just sort of almost a timeline all the way to chapter 9. Then you have sort of a pause because we're at the halfway point. It's going to give you some things about before and about after. And then it goes back into the timeline and progresses right through. And that hopefully will be helpful to you. Okay, so let's jump into this in chapter 12, which is the middle of that pause at the center point. It says this, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars." Now we can pause right there and just ask ourselves, who is this woman? Well, the number 12, we've already said the number 24 probably derives from two number 12s that are found at the end of the book in Revelation chapter 20, and well, actually not 20, really 21. You have the New Jerusalem that descends from heaven. It's got 12 foundation stones, 12 gates. The 12 gates are the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 foundation stones are the 12 apostles. And so 12 and 12, 24. This is probably where the number 24 is and why it's talking about elders or pastors of a church, and the number is 24, right? Because there were also elders in the nation of Israel, right? So it's talking about believers. But the two 12s are the numbers that make up the two different, believers. The believers from the Old Testament, believers from the New Testament, the church and Israel type of a thing. And here we have a woman who's clothed with the sun, and on the moon, and the moon upon her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Now that instantly should make us start to think this has something to do with either the church or with Israel, right? The 12 apostles or the 12 tribes of Israel. That's a good guess. Okay, let's go on and see which one. Is this the church or is this Israel? Now, the Catholics will say it's the church. As a matter of fact, they'll say this is Mary, and she represents the church. And this is where they get that she's the queen of heaven and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Let's see if they're right. If they're right, we want to, if that's what the Bible says, we want to do it, right? That's not what the Bible says. I'm just going to clue you in a little ahead of time. But if it was, then I would want to follow that, right? Because I want to be biblical. Verse 2, "And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads." Now, let's pause for a second. A dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, and how many crowns? 7 crowns. Now, this reminds us a lot of the beast in Daniel 7, right? Can you remember all the way back to Daniel 7? That was a long time ago that we did that, right? Daniel 7, there are 4 beasts, right? The first one is the Babylonian Empire. He's a lion with wings. The second one is the Medo-Persian Empire. He's a bear raised up on one side, because it was really the Persian Empire. The Persians sort of led the thing after Cyrus the Great. And then the third one was a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. And that represented the Greek Empire that was established in lightning speed in 3 years by Alexander the Great, and then split up into 4 kingdoms, just like the leopard. Really fast, splits into 4 heads, right? 4 wings. And then the 4th kingdom was never even said that it was a beast that Daniel could identify. It was just great and exceeding great and terrible, and it had iron teeth, and it had 10 horns. 10 horns, and the horns are interpreted to be kings, 3 of which are torn down, and one takes the place of the other 3. A new one takes the place of the other 3, and he is said to make war with the saints for 3.5 times. And if you compare that to the rest of the book of Daniel, we know that's 3.5 years, right? We talked about that. So now we see here he's got 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns. Now we'll talk more about what that means when we get to chapter, I think it's going to be chapter 17 and 18, where you have the mystery Babylon, the great harlot, because that's going to actually start interpreting this for us, right? But this is the first appearance of this beast here, and I think we can at least say this is drawing on the picture in Daniel, and we should at least make the assumption that this has something to do with that beast in Daniel, okay? Because even Daniel had 10 horns, which were kings, and then 3 of them went down, so that means there's 7, right? And all led by another one. So, interesting, all right? Verse 4, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now, let me skip forward just a little bit to give you sort of like an understanding here as we talk about this verse. Verse 9 says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. So we're going to get an interpretation later on in this same chapter that the dragon here is the devil. Now that's interesting, that the devil looks so much like that kingdom of that final empire from Daniel chapter 7. Like the devil's really involved in that kingdom, right? But anyway, so we know this is the devil, but he also looks a whole lot like this other kingdom, okay? And it says that his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven. Now this just seems very obviously to be not talking about actual stars in heaven, right? He's not actually taking a third of all of the stars in heaven that are burning with gas and bringing them to the earth because they're bigger than the earth and they would just burn the earth up, right? This is obviously talking figuratively, right? I think we can all agree. And so this must be speaking then about angels. Angels are often called stars throughout the Bible, right? Even Lucifer is called the morning star. That's what the name Lucifer means. It comes from the word for the morning star, the bright one of the morning, right? And so you remember Jesus, when he was talking to his disciples, and they said, oh, look, even the devils are subject unto us. He said, I beheld Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Remember that? So we know Satan fell from heaven. We know this dragon represents Satan. And it's said that he brings with him and casts them to the earth a third of the stars of heaven, which has to be, can't be referring to actual stars, has to be referring to angels. So here's an explanation then. Now there's a lot of other theories, but the most orthodox and natural explanation for what we see when we see demons in the Bible is this, these angels that were cast out of heaven, that fell with Satan when he fell. Now this would explain why Jesus, when they talk about, hey, the demons are subject unto us, Jesus says, I beheld Satan fall from heaven. Right? So the point here is that this goes all the way back to the beginning of the book of Genesis, right? When it says that he's going out, right? And then it says, so what we're seeing then is sort of in a microcosm all of the history of time, of the world. Starting with Satan's fall, which obviously happened before Satan deceived Adam and Eve in the garden. So that's before chapter 3 of Genesis. And then here's what happens next. So we have the fall of Satan in verse 4. And then it says, and the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now this is not the church. The church isn't giving birth to a special child, right? Now, the Catholic Church will say this is Mary, because Mary is going to be delivered with a special child. But Mary herself is not connected to 12 stars, right? Well, she's the form of the church. Well, again, now it's not the church that's giving birth to a child, right? This is definitely Israel, right? Because remember, when Satan fell in the garden, what was said as soon as he fell, then he went and deceived the woman, and the woman ate and gave to Adam, and then what was the curse on all three of them, the snake and the woman? And well, the curse was that men would have a sweat of their hands and labor, and that women would have childbirth and all this pain and all this kind of stuff. But for the serpent, the curse was that the seed of the woman would bruise his head. Remember, here in Revelation 12, it even says that old serpent. It's referring to him as the serpent, reminding us that he was there. So remember, when Satan first gets man to sin, immediately God promises a Savior. And then he's just waiting around for the Savior to be born so he can devour him. So that's what it's saying. So the dragon falls out of heaven. He takes a third of the stars of heaven with him. And he says, I'm just going to wait for that Messiah to come. And then I'm going to devour him. That's why he's at work in Egypt trying to keep Pharaoh from releasing the people of Israel. Why? Because that's God's people. Somewhere in that nation is going to come the Messiah, and I want to stamp him out, right? And so all throughout the Bible, really, you're seeing the devil trying to stamp out God's work and God preserving them, you know. And that's really the story throughout history of the ages. That's what the Bible does. It tells this story in a much longer form. And then, okay, so verse 4, he's ready to devour the child. Verse 5, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God to his throne. Okay, this is Jesus, right? I think we know this. He's going to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and he ascends up to heaven after he's born, right? Now, they're skipping a lot, right? There's a lot that happens between him being born and ascending to heaven, right? His whole ministry, three and a half years, and dying on the cross, rising from the dead, but then he ascends to heaven. So this is just skipping from point to point, right? And it says, she brought forth a child, but he ascends to heaven. He's caught up to God and to the throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. How long is that? 3.5 years. So now remember what Jesus said in Matthew 24. He said, when you see the abomination spoken of by Daniel, the abomination of desolation, then flee to the mountains. And pray that your flight be not in winter. Get out, because you're going to be there's going to be great tribulation, persecution against believers. And remember that beast in Daniel chapter 7, that one horn that comes up, he speaks terrible things, and he makes war with the saints for how long? A time, times, and the dividing of a time. That's 3. Now 1, 2, plus a half. That's 3.5. times, and we know that's years, partially from Revelation chapter 12. Okay, so this is, you see how it all ties together here. This is from the beginning all the way to the end, what Satan's been trying to do. Satan falls, he tries to stamp out Israel, he's waiting for the Messiah to be born, tries to devour the Messiah. God, of course, protects the Messiah. Messiah goes up to heaven, and then he goes to try to persecute Israel. And it skips all the way forward to the end times, where they're going to be protected for 3.5 years. And so this last 3.5 years of the 70th week of the 7 years that is left, this is what it's like, really big prophecy fulfillment in this last 3.5. The first 3.5 is just sort of like, hey, did you know that you're in the last 7 years? You better get ready. And then this is when it all starts, right? The big prophecy fulfillment stuff all is going to happen in this last 3.5 years. Okay? Verse 7, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. Now, there means it's a possession, right? It's not THERE, it's THEIR, right? I make that mistake all the time when I'm sending people text messages, But their place, meaning they're not allowed in heaven anymore. Not that there's not enough room in heaven for them, right? No, they're not allowed there anymore. Now, right now, Satan can get into heaven. Or at least he did during the book of Job, right? He was coming before God and accusing. And it says here, whenever this happens, which must be, I think it's fair to assume that this is at the halfway point of the tribulation, and I think we'll see some more evidence for that in just a minute. It says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, and he was cast out into the earth, and his angels, there we go, we know we were right about that interpretation of the stars, his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God. See, the announcement of, hey, this is the beginning of the end, guys. Now that Satan's out of heaven, we're getting close. Man, we're getting close. Remember, Daniel even counted the days. It's going to be 1,335 days from the abomination of desolation until the blessed, event that everyone's waiting for. We're getting close. I heard a loud voice saying, now has come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Now notice it says that Satan is the accuser of our brethren, which accused them before our God day and night. Satan's a busy guy, but I don't think he has to sleep, so I guess he's able to get a lot done. And it seems like pretty regularly, it almost seems like at least twice in a 24-hour period, that the devil is before the throne of God saying, hey, did you see what Josh Barnes did today? Yeah, you think he's pretty great, but look at what all the stuff he did. And he's accusing us before God, which is why I think I would just sort of imagine one of the things that Jesus is doing at the right hand of the Father, saying, yeah, but we took care of that. Yeah, but we took care of that, But honestly, the things that we do on this earth that dishonor God, don't just dishonor God on this earth. The devil makes sure that they come up in heaven so that it'll be dishonoring to him there, or that's his goal. And so now he's cast out. Now he's cast out at this time. And so what does the devil do when he sees that he's cast out? Verse 13, and when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time. Okay? We've heard of that before, right? I think maybe that's come up. Okay, I'm not going to try to keep making that same joke. But it's pretty interesting how it's pretty obvious to see the link here, right? To see what's going on. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. Now people have said, well, what is this? What are the 2 wings of a great eagle that helped this woman fly? Obviously these are figurative things about something that actually happens. Well, we don't know what they are, right? We just don't know, right? Some people have said, well, America, the symbol of America is a bald eagle, right? So maybe America comes and helps. I would love for that to be true. I seriously doubt it, but who knows? The point is we don't know. In some way, she's helped, and she's protected by God. And the flood that comes out of the dragon's mouth, that seems to be like a lot of people and a lot of nations that are trying to make war against her. Because remember, like all the waters churning in Daniel chapter 7, out of them came the beasts, right? Out of all the nations of the earth. And so that the flood seems a little bit easier maybe to interpret. Like it's just he's taking all the nations of the earth and they're all making war against her, which is what we were told in Daniel 7. But how she escapes, I don't know. God just supernaturally protects her and he doesn't really tell us how. But I imagine when it happens, people will say, aha, those were the wings of the eagle that God just gave to them and protected them. Okay, so then now we're going to zoom in a little closer when we get to chapter 13 and look at exactly how this happens, the details of this event. This is general stuff. Verse 17, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, and that kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. War with the saints for 3.5 times. This is Daniel 7, right? This is what Daniel told us, right? Now we get to chapter 13, because Daniel keeps on bringing up this one thing, the abomination of desolation. As a matter of fact, in Daniel chapter 11, it says that he's going to exalt himself against the most holy, and he's going to basically declare himself to be God. In Daniel chapter 11, we find this about the abomination of the king. And here's chapter 13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. This seems to be the same beast, but now it's rising up out of the sea. Notice that, it's the devil in chapter 12, but now it's rising up out of the sea. It's the devil sort of manifest in this kingdom, or in this case, I think it's going to represent a kingdom in chapter 17 and 18. It's going to represent the king of the kingdom in chapter 13. You say, well, you can't just keep mixing and matching. It's got to be one or the other. Well, no, it doesn't. Remember, Daniel chapter 7 had the lion with wings that represented Babylon, the kingdom, and the lion was raised up and given the heart of a man, which is exactly what Nebuchadnezzar, the first king of Babylon, the notable king of Babylon, he became like a beast for a little while, then was raised up like a man and was given the heart of a man again, right? So the one king can be representative of the whole kingdom, and the kingdom can be representative of the king, right? So here I think it's representing the king of the kingdom, while later on you're going to see that it also represents this kingdom, this one world empire that's at the end that I'll show you, I think, is very obviously Rome, the empire of Rome rebuilt. Okay? But we'll get to that in chapter 17 and 18. It says this, and the beast which I saw, verse 2, was like unto a leopard. Now this one's interesting. The leopard was the beast of Greece, right? And upon his feet, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. Wait a minute, the bear represented the kingdom of Medo-Persia. And his mouth as the mouth of a lion. Wait a minute, that was Babylon. And the dragon gave him his power. Wait, the dragon looks exactly like him and was in the last chapter, right? This beast is not the dragon, but he gets his power from the dragon. He looks just like the dragon, except he's also got pieces of the other nations of the world. Do you know that when one empire conquers another empire, they don't just make everything new? They just sort of assume all the power of the previous empire and keep going, you know? When Persia conquered Babylon, all the lands of Babylon just became Persia's, right? And when the Greek Empire conquered Persia, guess what? All the power of Persia just became the Greek power. And when Rome came, they conquered the Greek Empire. Guess what? All the power of the Greek Empire now just passes on to the Rome. It's all basically the same thing given to different hands. And this is the last of all of them, right? So all the power of all of them is sort of summed up in this last final beast, this last kingdom of the earth. And that's why you're seeing, I think, all of them in there. It says this, and I saw one of the heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Whatever this is, it looks incredibly miraculous. Some people will say, oh, maybe this is the Antichrist who looks like he dies and actually doesn't die, but everyone thinks he dies and he rises back. Oh, maybe the Antichrist actually did die, and then Satan raises him from the dead. Or maybe this is talking about the empire of Rome, which looks like it's dead now and is going to rise again. I don't think it's that last one in this case. But that last one is going to be found in Revelation chapter 17. So being the Roman Empire that's sort of dead now is coming back. That's in Revelation 17. I don't think it's that one here, because this is something people look at and are like, wow, that's amazing. This is wonderful, and they worship him for it. So whatever it is, they're going to worship the beast because of it. It says this, and they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. So they're worshiping Satan because he's giving power to the beast. And they worshipped the beast. This is, I think, the Antichrist, the leader of this kingdom, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. This is exactly what Daniel 7 says about the little horn that comes up, that he's speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given to him to continue 42 months, 3.5 years. Daniel 7 says that little horn is going to have blasphemy. It's going to make war with the saints for 3.5 times, right? So this is very clearly a fulfillment now that we're seeing of the book of Daniel. Verse 6, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and the power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell upon the earth that shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life. This means the people who worship him as God are not saved. That shouldn't be too much of a surprise. They are not written in the book of life. They're not saved. You don't worship the beast if you're saved, right? It says, verse 9, if any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. He's like a lamb, right? Remember Jesus is the lamb, but he's like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. So you sort of have that image of like a sacrificial lamb, religious figure type of a thing, but his voice doesn't sound like a lamb. His voice is coming from the dragon. Okay, this is what we would call the false prophet. We'll talk about it more as we get further on in the book, but later on in the book it's called the false prophet. He doeth great wonders so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Remember the 2 witnesses who were real prophets were bringing fire actually out of their mouth to consume people who would try to kill them. He's bringing fire out of heaven, sort of mimicking what the 2 witnesses did, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do, and the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which hath the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Okay, now let's pair this up with a couple things we learned from Daniel. Remember, Daniel compares this abomination in the end times with an abomination that takes place in the Greek Empire by Antiochus Epiphanes. One of the things that Antiochus did, you might remember, we talked about it, was he considered himself to be Zeus incarnate. He would call himself, Epiphanes means the manifestation of God, and he made on coins that were supposed to have Zeus, he sort of made him look more like him because he thought he was Zeus. And he put an image to Zeus, which he thought was to himself, in the temple of God. That's one of the things he did to desecrate it, as well as offering swine on the altar and all that kind of thing. This is a picture of what's going to happen later. And remember that Paul, when he writes about it in 2 Thessalonians, says that he sits in the temple of God and he declares that he is God, right? And so here we're getting a little more details on how this happens. So remember, he goes and he brings a false prophet in, the Antichrist does, and the false prophet starts saying, look, he's God. He maybe he died and came back to life, or people think he died and came back to life. That would be a good possible reason why they think that. Or something, and he's doing miracles to say, look, he's God, and then he sets up, looks like an image in the temple that he gives power to speak to them. And so they'll come in and they'll talk to this image of the Antichrist, and it'll speak to them. And, this is God. Oh, my goodness, this is, and it's all just satanic, demonic, miraculous things. And it says here, verse 15, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and in their foreheads. Why is he doing this? Well, because the Antichrist, the beast, has decided to make war with the saints. How do you make war with saints? Right? You have to know which people are saints, right? And which people aren't. Well, God's already marked in the foreheads 144,000 saints, right? But I don't know if that's actually visible to people, right? What he wants is a mark for people who are worshiping him, so he can know who the saints are, right? So he's going to say, listen, you come, you worship me, you'll get the mark. If you don't have the mark, you're not going to be able to buy anything. You're not going to be able to sell anything. You're not going to be able to do anything in this economy. And if you don't have the mark, you're the enemy. We're going to kill you. So come worship and prove that you're not a Christian, and then you can do your thing. But if you won't worship, then we'll know that you're a Christian. That's how we're going to weed you out. Then we're going to kill you. Okay? So come worship me, And that's going to be that's what we're establishing here. And it's really not. It doesn't look like he's making people worship him, right? It's the false prophet who's coming along and saying, you got to worship him, you got to worship him. But he's the one going out and making war against those who don't. There's a guy in the first century who did something like this. The Roman Emperor Nero. He did something like this. And he was not happy with Christians, especially, who would say that there's no Lord but Christ. No other name under heaven whereby we must be saved. And it used to be, Caesar is the name Caesar will save us. Caesar will save us. They say, well, there's no other name under heaven whereby we must be saved. But Jesus, this didn't really please Caesar very much. So he devised this idea. Look, all you've got to do, if you want to buy and sell stuff, you need papers to buy and sell stuff. And you're going to need to have these papers filled out. And you're going to get the papers, easy to do. All you got to do is offer anything, as small as a pinch of incense. You offer anything as little as a pinch of incense on an altar to Caesar, and just say the words, Kaiser Kyrios, meaning Caesar is Lord. And then you'll get the papers, you'll be able to buy and sell, you won't have any problem. You can be Christian as much as you want. And, of course, it's not Christian, right? So the Christians refused to do it, and were persecuted and killed for it in the first century. And this was sort of like the devil's take one on starting the end times sort of a thing. And this is kind of what we're seeing here. Look what it says, verse 16. He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Okay, there's two places it can be, but both of them are places that you're not going to cover up with regular clothing. This is not something hidden. This is supposed to be visible. Another reason why we know that a vaccine is not the mark of the beast, because you can't see it. The point of the mark is you have to be able to see it. It has to be visible. That's why it's forehead or your hand. It's something that people see you walking down the street, they know, you're not one of them. You're not one of us. Get him, It has to be something visible, right? It doesn't mean there's not nefarious things going on with the vaccine, by the way. Okay, I'm in that camp. I'm just saying it's not the mark of the beast, okay? So it's got to be in the forehead or in the right hand. It has to be visible. And it says that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark of the beast or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So there's three options, and there's two places you could do it. We're going to work with you, okay? If you don't like 666 because those Christians made you feel weird about it, you don't have to do the number of the beast. You could put the name of the beast on your forehead. Or you can do the mark. So the mark is not 666. Everybody thinks the mark of the beast is 666. It's not. There's a mark or his name or his number, and his number is 666. So you can do the 666 thing on your forehead or on your hand. Forehead or on your hand. You could do the name, or you can do the mark, whatever the mark is. I have no idea what the mark looks like. And we don't really even know what the name, but somehow the name is tied to the number, because it says here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And it says that it's the number of his name in verse 17. 666, that's 666. So let's try to figure out who the Antichrist is by counting out the numbers. Please don't ever let somebody try to. People have done it for many, many years. I think when it says "let him that hath understanding," I think it's giving us like a little soft hint here. You're not going to know until you get there. Okay, when you get there, that now you're going to be one of the people who God wants to know the answer to this, and so now you're going to see. Oh, wait a minute. That's the guy, right? So you're in the middle of the tribulation. You saw this rapture and you weren't saved. Now you come to faith in Christ afterwards, and this guy is now starting to lead the world. And you're opening up the Bible. Remember, the Bible's not just for us, right? The Bible's for saints who are in the middle of this as well, and they're going to read that and they're going to say, "Oh my goodness, this is so obvious that 666 is the number of this guy's name." It's just not going to be obvious to us because we don't need to know. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. I don't think God has given us that understanding. I don't think we're meant to know that. And honestly, you can really make 666 into anything you want. And I have heard it, oh my goodness, I've become nauseous with all the different, Donald Trump, his name comes out to 666. But Joe Biden, his name comes out to 666. Barack Obama, just look at, and if you just rearrange it a certain way and count the numbers just right, you're 666 on anything. As a matter of fact, I even did a little try, and I got it to work out where Jesus Saves came out to 666, and all kinds of different things. It's just, you can't, don't go there, okay? Please. Let's just stick with what we know and admit that there's things we don't know, and we don't have to know them all. But here's what we do know, okay? In the future, there's a 7-year period of time that's not fulfilled yet. Halfway through that period of time, there's going to be an abomination of desolation by an evil king who's going to be the last king over the world before Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom. And after that abomination of desolation, he's going to make war with the saints. And this gives us details of what that's going to look like and what's going to happen. But God's going to preserve his people. And you know what? If God can preserve his people in the darkest hour of all of human history that's still in front of us, then he can preserve us now. However dark this hour might get, right? God is all about preserving his people and accomplishing his purpose, right? So his purpose is going to be accomplished, and we're going to be taken care of here or in heaven, one way or the other, and we don't have to worry about it. That doesn't mean we don't fight for what's right here in this world while we're here. Some people make too much of an emphasis on hey, we're citizens of heaven. We're not citizens of America. I say, that's nonsense. While we're here, we're going to fight for what's right. We're not going to back down for right. But we don't put our hope and our confidence in in this world, because this world is going to end up right here, right? Eventually it gets there, sooner or later. We want to fight for right while we're here, but know that our future and our hope and our confidence is in heaven. Praise God for that.